Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to this explainer where we're going to unpack one of the most fascinating and honestly massive contradictions at the heart of Singapore's demographic future. You see, Singapore is globally renowned for its rapid economic development and an absolutely stellar education system. I mean, it's world class. But right now, the nation is confronting a severe, accelerating crisis that threatens the very foundation of its success. We are looking at a system that is incredibly efficient at producing top-tier students, but is simultaneously deterring adults from actually becoming parents. It's a true demographic paradox, and we're going to break down exactly how this happens, step by step. 0.87. That is Singapore's staggeringly low resident total fertility rate projected for the year 2025. Just let that sink in for a second. That figure represents only 27,500 resident births. To put that into perspective, the replacement level required to just sustain a population is 2.1. So 0.87 places Singapore right among the lowest fertility nations globally. During a 2026 budget debate, Deputy Prime Minister Gan Kim Young didn't mince words. He flat out declared this an existential challenge. And why is that? Because if there isn't a significant intervention soon, the citizen population will literally begin to shrink by the early 2040s. That has profound implications, right? It threatens the nation's economic vitality, its national defense, and honestly, the entire social compact that took Singapore from a developing nation to a first-world metropolis in a single generation. And this brilliantly illustrates the paradox we're talking about. On one side, we have this incredible, world-class human capital. Singapore consistently dominates international student assessments like PISA and TIMSS. But on the exact flip side, we have a collapsing birth rate. The massive contradiction of this success is that the very system engineered to produce highly competitive, top-tier human capital is simultaneously suppressing the creation of actual human beings. The intense focus on academic achievement, which is driven by a meritocratic ideology that heavily rewards cognitive ability, has created a societal environment where parenting has basically become synonymous with high-stakes educational management. So here is our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll start with the demographic paradox, move into the education arms race, explore the PSLE epicenter, look at some radical structural reforms, and wrap up with the need for a holistic paradigm shift. Section 1. The demographic paradox. Let's look at the sheer gravity of this trajectory. For decades now, the Singaporean government has relied on a really robust suite of pro-natalist policies to encourage family formation. We're talking direct financial incentives like baby bonuses, expanded parental leave, housing priority schemes, and heavily subsidized childcare. The rationale was largely economic, right? The thought process was, if you alleviate the financial and logistical burdens, well, birth rates should naturally rise. But the continued precipitous decline in the fertility rate proves these policy levers are just fundamentally insufficient. Sure, they're appreciated by parents, absolutely, but they aren't reversing the overarching trend. That is exactly why the government formed the 2026 Marriage and Parenthood Reset Workgroup, chaired by Minister Indranee Rajah. This marks a truly critical pivot. They're no longer just treating low fertility as a math or economic problem. They're finally treating it as a deeply entrenched sociological issue, aiming to tackle the mindset shifts and societal norms that actively deter couples from having kids. Section 2, the education arms race. Let's shift our focus from macroeconomics right into the living room. 1.8 billion Singapore dollars. That excruciating figure is what Singaporean families spent on private tuition and enrichment in just 2023. It's a rapid increase from previous years, and it really highlights a deeply ingrained belief that formal schooling, despite being globally top-ranked, just isn't enough to secure success anymore. Supplementary tutoring isn't seen as a luxury, it's treated as an absolute necessity. And the financial toll of this shadow education industry is massive. For a middle-class family, dropping $1,000 to $2,000 a month on tuition for 2 children directly crowds out the financial possibility of having a third child, or sometimes even a first. It creates this baseline expectation of expenditure that all prospective parents are factoring into their family planning. To really understand why parents do this, we have to look at something called the quantity-quality trade-off. First popularized by Nobel laureate Gary Becker and researched deeply in the Singaporean context by Dr. Polin Tan, this model explains that in knowledge-based economies, parents face a harsh choice. In East Asian systems like Singapore's, where academic credentials are the primary currency for social mobility, the perceived returns on investing in a child's education are exceptionally high. Because the system sorts students so early based on rigorous academic performance, it dramatically increases the marginal benefit of intensive parental investment. So what happens? Parents rationally choose to concentrate their finite resources on just one or two children to ensure their competitive edge. The system rewards achievement and penalizes a lack of ambition, so parents logically decide to limit family size to guarantee the quote-unquote quality of their children's opportunities. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how sociologist Teo Yen points out that education has evolved to become an incredibly demanding part of parental care labor. Beyond the direct financial costs we just talked about, there's this heavy, invisible load of educational management. The system implicitly relies heavily on parents to manage daily homework, coordinate complex tuition schedules, and basically act as auxiliary teachers. And this invisible load disproportionately affects women, leading to the phenomenon of the PSLE mother. These are women sacrificing career progression, transitioning to part-time work, or taking extended unpaid leave just to manage their child's high-stakes primary school leaving examination. When the societal script dictates that being a good parent means managing a high-stakes educational tournament, having multiple children just becomes overwhelmingly daunting. Section 3. The PSLE epicenter. This brings us to the central villain of our story. Let's move to and see how this builds. Because the stakes at age 12 are so incredibly high, it creates a severe cascade effect, funneling anxiety all the way down to toddlers. Yes, toddlers. Parents acutely aware of the narrowing funnel of opportunities engage in what researchers call concerted cultivation on steroids. They are meticulously planning educational pathways, enrolling preschoolers in phonics, mathematics, and coding enrichment. Literally, coding for toddlers, just to secure an early advantage for an exam that is years and years away. This hyper-competitive environment fosters kayasuism, which is a pervasive fear of losing out. Advocacy groups like Every Child SG argue that this fundamentally damages parent-child relationships, turning homes into conflict zones over academics and entirely stripping away the intrinsic joy of learning. Now, to be fair, the Ministry of Education has tried to soften the edges. They recently transitioned from the highly specific T-score system to a broader achievement level, or AL, scoring system. But critics note that this merely shifted rather than alleviated the anxiety. Parents now just stress over wider AL grading brackets instead of single decimal points, because the underlying architecture of the system, that early sorting based on high-stakes academic performance, remains entirely intact. Section 4. Radical Structural Reforms. Let's pivot and look at the highly anticipated solutions. The Reset Work Group is expected to propose interventions that dismantle this education arms race right at its roots. We're looking at core structural interventions, overhauling or even making the PSLE optional, completely centralizing how primary school admissions work, decoupling education from intense parental labor, and shifting the focus to 21st century competencies. The goal here is monumental. They want to reframe parenthood from an endless administrative burden back into a manageable, joyful journey. First up, the PSLE. To alleviate that do-or-die pressure at age 12, a highly viable proposal is to implement through train models. This would allow a large majority of students, perhaps 80 to 90%, to progress seamlessly from primary 1 all the way to secondary 4, without ever facing a definitive national exam at age 12. Instead of a single high-stakes test, the system could pivot to continuous, low-stakes, computerized adaptive assessments. These track progress and identify learning gaps over time, without all that public sorting anxiety. By removing the hard stop at age 12, parents would no longer feel compelled to engage in that frantic arms race of tuition during the primary years. But as we know, the stress begins long before age 12. It's rooted deeply in primary school admissions. Currently, parents volunteer hundreds of hours and pay massive housing premiums just to secure spots in perceived elite schools based on geographic proximity or alumni ties. The work group may recommend automating this process entirely. Removing alumni advantages and implementing a computerized allocation system would create a much more equitable playing field. Crucially, by decoupling housing prices from elite school proximity, it eliminates the financial strain of paying a premium for a house just because it's within a 1-kilometer radius of a popular school. This dismantles the early stratification that exhausts parents before their kid even steps into a classroom. Section 5. A holistic paradigm shift. Because educational reform alone isn't going to cut it. Sociologist Dr. Vincent Chua makes a great observation. The education system ultimately reflects economic rewards. Think about it. If societal prizes like high-paying jobs and social status are heavily skewed towards academic tournament winners, well, parents will logically train their kids for that tournament. The economy needs to shift. Employers led by the public service must start valuing non-traditional credentials and diverse portfolios. The workplace needs to evolve from an inflexible corporate culture to one that actually normalizes flexible work and shared parental leave, ensuring fathers take on equal caregiving roles so mothers aren't disproportionately burdened. And of course, cost of living constraints must be addressed with integrated affordable housing policies to ensure couples feel financially secure enough to even embark on parenthood. So the crucial point is that we must change the cultural narrative. Singapore has successfully marketed the idea of meritocracy, but the flip side of that coin is that failure feels like a personal shortcoming, placing immense psychological burden on parents. We need a communitarian approach to child rearing. We really need to move away from individualizing risk and relying on the media to showcase only top scores. Instead, the media must showcase diverse role models of success. Furthermore, we absolutely must prioritize mental health support because a society that values well-being over relentless tournament competition is inherently more conducive to family formation. Which leaves us with this final provocative thought to wrap up our explainer today. Can a society built on fierce competition learn to embrace the joy of simply raising a child? The current system, while highly effective at producing world-class human capital, is inadvertently functioning as a demographic contraceptive. Reforming the education arms race is an indispensable step, but securing Singapore's future requires redefining what it means to be a successful child and a supported parent. It's a monumental task, but the alternative is a slow, irreversible decline. Thank you so much for joining me to unpack this complex issue today. I hope it gave you a clear perspective on the deep structural shifts required for Singapore's demographic survival.